The story begins in a manner where the sound of loud thudding footsteps and strained breathing echoes through the halls. The noise belonged to a maid who is restrained on the floor while a boy stands nearby, holding a cane with a sinister expression. However, the sharpness in his eyes suddenly disappears, replaced by confusion. As if he has lost his memory, he appears completely clueless, wondering who the girl before him is, and he lets out a confused "what the hell?" Just moments ago, he had been playing a game, but now all of a sudden there is a woman bound in an unsettling situation right in front of him. Noticing his reaction, the maid addresses him as Weiss-sama and asks what is wrong. He is stunned by how beautiful she is, yet feels as though he has seen her before. As he thinks about this, he notices his reflection in a mirror, which shocks him. He looks exactly like the villainous noble Weiss from the game, making him question if he has become him. No matter how closely he examines himself, he is certain this is the face of the villainous character from the game Noblesse Oblige, a school fantasy game he had cleared multiple times. In that game, there is a character who always stands in the protagonist Alan's way, the villainous noble Weiss, a despicable man who uses his power to relentlessly torment the weak. After being brutally defeated by the protagonist, Weiss had become even worse, eventually turning into a servant of the Demon King, only to be used as a shield and die in the end. Now that he has become Weiss, he wonders if the maid before him is Lilith. In the game, Lilith had been Weiss's maid, whom he had a habit of tormenting, something the protagonist had found unforgivable. Questioning why Weiss would do something so cruel to such a cute girl, he decides to quickly untie her. However, he hesitates, wondering if suddenly changing his behavior like this would make him suspicious. Regardless, he begins untying her, as he cannot just leave her like this, and tells her he will stop here. While doing so, he notices marks on her neck, and when he mentions them, she starts trembling. Finding her pitiful, he decides to try using healing magic. To his surprise, it works, healing Lilith's neck as the marks vanish. This healing magic had been a feature available from the start of the game, but the developers had kept it hidden. As Lilith looks at him in confusion, he tries to act like Weiss, telling her not to get the wrong idea and that he only wanted to practice healing magic. After hearing this, she pauses briefly before bursting into tears and thanking him. She expresses her surprise, as she had not known Weiss could use healing magic. Realizing that she is thanking him despite everything being Weiss's fault, he understands that Weiss had pushed her to the point of becoming this obedient. Unable to continue acting like Weiss, he apologizes to Lilith for everything, saying he will not do it anymore. This shocks her, and she wonders what has happened to him. A few moments later, Weiss is in the dining room, having just finished eating while the butler takes away his plate. The butler, named Zevis, is deeply shocked, as Weiss would usually complain that the food is bad and throw the plate on the floor. Weiss then calls out to him, apologizes for treating food carelessly, and adds that the seasoning was perfect today. This utterly shocks Zevis, and after a brief pause, he bursts into tears, feeling honored to hear such gracious words. Not only him, but the other servants as well react the same way, which troubles Weiss, as to him, it had been just a simple meal. This reaction makes him wonder if the people around him think Weiss has simply matured, as they do not even seem to notice the clear change in his personality. This only proves to him that the old Weiss truly had been a terrible person. Moving on, he decides that from now on he will make sure never to make Lilith sad again, and to start, he chooses to dispose of the cane. Holding it in his hand, he walks toward the furnace to throw it in. He is determined to change even further, especially since, as a noble, he is obligated to attend the academy, which is only a year away. In the game, after losing to the protagonist, Weiss's reputation had hit rock bottom, leading to his downfall. Thus, he believes that if he does not lose to the protagonist this time, the future might change. With that in mind, he throws the cane into the furnace and lights it, resolving to do whatever it takes, even if it requires all his strength, as he is determined to avoid the path to ruin. A few days later, Weiss is covered in sweat, panting heavily as he sits atop a log, holding a sword, when someone suddenly calls out to him, startling him. The person is a woman named Milk Avitas, who sternly asks if he is even taking this seriously. In a weak voice, he replies that he is, but adds that he does not think he can move anymore and asks for a short break. Milk sarcastically accepts his request, adding that he can rest properly if he wants to be known as a loser at the academy. Weiss realizes he cannot argue with her. Wanting to grow stronger, he had used his family's connections to find an exceptional teacher, and that person is Milk Avitas, who had originally appeared at the end of the game and was considered the closest to being the strongest in the royal capital. However, when hiring her, he had gotten ahead of himself and told her to forget his noble status and train him without mercy. That decision proves to be a mistake, as she turns out to be extremely sadistic and frightening. Lilith then arrives with the item Weiss had requested, and he thanks her. It turns out to be a headband, and as he puts it on, Lilith asks what the writing on it means. He confidently replies that it means he will do his best to the point of death. The game Nobles Oblige is also referred to as a death game because of its extreme difficulty, requiring players to clear it through repeated attempts. Now that this is reality, he understands that if he neglects his preparation, he will either be expelled or die. Because of this, he cannot afford to waste even a second. The problem, however, is that he has never properly trained his body, not even in his past life, which is why he struggles so much. Still, this training is essential for learning swordsmanship and magic. Under Milk's guidance, he starts each day by practicing his form, then runs endlessly to build stamina and finally endures her brutal muscle training. His routine lasts from morning until night, and he repeats it every single day. Later that night, Zevis serves him the meal he had requested, packed with protein. Trembling from the intense training, he apologizes to Zevis for burdening him. It has been 2 weeks since he started training, and although injuries can be healed easily, maintaining the proper diet is just as important for strengthening his body. Thanks to Zevis providing constant support, he manages to endure the overwhelming workload. Another week passes, and although he has somewhat gotten used to the training, it remains so harsh that each day feels like an entire month to him. Since he has gotten used to physical training, he decides to hire a magic tutor. As Zevis informs him that one has already been arranged and calls them in, Weiss can only hope the teacher is kind, as he has grown tired of Milk's strict training. While wondering what kind of teacher he will get, the person enters the room, removes their hat, and greets him. To his shock, the new teacher turns out to be none other than Milk, who reintroduces herself. Weiss collapses to the ground, shouting, "Not again." Milk calmly explains that she is not only a master of swordsmanship, but also of magic. Hearing this, Weiss questions the point of her appearing in the same role again. He then quietly whispers to Zevis, reminding him that he had specifically requested a kind teacher, but Zevis explains that Milk is a genius magic swordswoman capable of using 2 of the 4 greatest magical attributes. Overhearing their conversation, Milk asks Weiss if he wants her to be gentle. She adds that she will teach him magic gently, and when Weiss asks if that is really true, she confidently confirms it. However, it turns out to be anything but gentle, as Weiss soon finds himself standing beneath a waterfall while Milk instructs him not to close his eyes and instead channel his magical power. Completely exhausted, Weiss internally questions where her gentleness is, as this is even harsher than the swordsmanship training. Milk then tells him to keep going for another 2 hours, explaining that in order to use magic he needs mana, and the only way to increase it is through continuous training. She orders him to repeat this every day until he passes out, a demand he initially refuses but ultimately succumbs to as he collapses. From that day on, in addition to basic magic training, Weiss also begins practicing with wooden swords. However, it feels less like training and more like a beating, as he is constantly struck down, with Milk remarking that he is full of openings. Lilith then steps in to heal Weiss, telling him she will support him with healing magic so he can continue giving his best. Grateful, Weiss thanks her while Milk watches with a mischievous expression, openly remarking that she has found herself a good punching bag. And indeed, Weiss is relentlessly beaten, or trained, until his entire face is bruised. Yet even in this state, what he finds most strange is why someone as lazy as his former self is working so hard. In his past life, he had been like a living corpse, always running away from challenges and giving up immediately. Reflecting on that past, he wonders what has changed, how he is now able to work so diligently, and what truly separates his current self from who he once was. As time passes, 2 months go by since he began his training. After finishing for the day, he sits near the waterfall when Milk suddenly places her hand on his head. With a genuine smile, she tells him that he managed to endure for 2 hours, which is a significant improvement. Slightly blushing, Weiss points at her hand and asks if this is what she meant by teaching him gently. Milk confirms, explaining that every time he achieves his goal, he will receive a head pat as a reward. Hearing this, Weiss comments that the ratio of carrot to stick feels completely off, with far more punishment than reward. However, Milk insists that is not the case, which confuses him, until Lilith arrives carrying a basket, saying she has brought him lunch. Milk then explains that she is merely the one wielding the stick, while he has likely already been receiving plenty of carrots from others. She reminds him not to forget the support he receives, as it is what allows him to keep pushing forward and do his best. Weiss understands what Milk is trying to say, realizing that the reason he can do his best is because of everyone around him. Lilith always stays by his side and supports him, Zevis constantly helps him with his meals, and Milk hardens her heart for the sake of his growth. He comes to understand that he has made it this far only because of their combined support. The real Weiss and his former self had only ever thought about themselves, which is why no one had supported them or even bothered to scold them. This realization leads him to understand that what he truly needed was a balance of love, both gentle and harsh. Now living as Weiss, he decides that he will no longer live solely for himself. Until now, his goal had been self-preservation, simply wanting to avoid death or ruin. However, from this point on, he sets a new goal: to ensure that Lilith and the others who have helped him never feel sadness, and to show everyone a version of himself they can be proud of. For both his own sake and theirs, he resolves to avoid the path of destruction and keep everyone happy. The next day, although his determination remains strong, the waterfall training is still too much for him. Regardless, Milk increases his training time to 4 hours and tells him to continue until he collapses, which he inevitably does, proving that the training is still overwhelmingly difficult. A few days later, Weiss arrives in a town called League Belt Town alongside Milk and Lilith. In the game, this is the first town the protagonist had reached after the prologue. As they walk through the streets, Weiss notices groups of men behaving aggressively, making him realize how poor the town's security is. Moving on, he calls out to Milk and asks who his opponent will be. It has been 3 months since he began training, and since the timing seems right, he has been assigned a practical combat test in this town. Observing his surroundings, Weiss wonders if he will be fighting some random thug. However, a chill runs down his spine when Milk does not respond and instead smiles ominously. After a brief silence, she tells him not to worry, as she is selecting the best possible opponent for him and that he should look forward to it. While Lilith cheers him on, Weiss trembles, unable to feel at ease after seeing Milk's expression. As they continue walking, he notices a group of thugs making crude comments about Lilith and Milk, remarking on their bodies and calling them their type. They also mock Weiss, saying he is arrogant for walking around with such beautiful women. Uncomfortable, Weiss glances at them, while Lilith stares back with dark, hollow eyes. Internally, he warns the thugs to watch what they say, as the person beside him could easily kill them. In the game, League Belt Town had been known as the worst town, a den of criminals just like these men. While Milk would have no trouble handling them, Weiss worries about Lilith and resolves to protect her at any cost. However, Lilith, who is staring at the thugs with clear killing intent, coldly mutters that they are annoying. Caught off guard, Weiss wonders if he heard her correctly, but Milk calmly tells Lilith to ignore them as they are not worth her time. Lilith agrees with a smile and immediately returns to her usual cheerful demeanor, leaving Weiss confused. He is certain he had just seen her radiating intense killing intent, yet he begins to question whether it was only his imagination. Later, at the Adventurers Guild, the atmosphere is tense as people nervously whisper while watching a particular scene unfold. At the center of it all, Weiss stands surrounded by 3 men who are pressuring him to step outside. These men are the Boudin brothers, the very opponents Milk has chosen for his test. A few moments earlier, Milk had brought Weiss to the Adventurers Guild and through a window explained that the 3 brothers were involved in truly heinous crimes. They had managed to avoid punishment until now by paying bribes, but the military police who had accepted those bribes had already been arrested. With that taken care of, the brothers now needed to be dealt with, making them the perfect opponents for a real battle. Because they are dangerous criminals, Milk tells Weiss not to hold back, to which he responds with a forced smile, suggesting they head back instead. The moment he says this, he tries to run away, but Milk immediately catches him and tells him to listen carefully. She explains that although he has strong determination, he lacks real combat experience. Since facing real combat is inevitable, she believes it is better for him to confront it now. She adds that if he misses this opportunity, there is no guarantee she will be there to watch over him the next time he is forced into a real fight. If he ends up facing such a situation alone, his inexperience could cost him his life. Because of this, she reassures him that she will step in if things become dangerous, allowing him to enter his first real battle with confidence. Hearing this, Weiss feels relieved and begins to see Milk as someone he can rely on. However, back in the present, as he stands outside with the Boudin brothers, there is no sign of Milk anywhere, causing him to internally question where she has gone. He quickly realizes that she has tricked him, disappearing with Lilith while he had agreed to the fight under the assumption that she would back him up. Now that she is gone, he wonders what he should do, but knows he cannot back down simply out of fear. Bracing himself, he sets a goal to at least sever one of their arms. Although killing them is not necessary, he is unsure if he can avoid doing so, as he is outnumbered 3-1 and cannot be certain of victory in a fair fight. More importantly, despite appearing like mere thugs, they are actually quite skilled. Accepting that he cannot avoid the confrontation, he begins forming a plan, recalling how Milk had told him to follow everything she had taught him and that he would be fine. Meanwhile, Milk and Lilith are watching from a nearby inn as Weiss heads off with the brothers. Lilith calls Milk cruel for deceiving Weiss and herself as well, but Milk argues that if she had not done so, Weiss would not have been motivated enough. She insists that a fight where someone is ready to step in at any moment is not true practice, though she casually adds that she will probably intervene if things become dangerous, which does little to reassure Lilith, especially considering how drunk Milk appears. At that moment, it becomes clear that the inn is filled with thugs, including the same men who had been making crude remarks earlier, and they recognize Lilith and Milk. As they approach, commenting on Lilith's beauty and their supposed luck, she responds with a cold glare. The men surround them and introduce themselves as the band of thieves who control the area. One of them, wearing a sinister smirk, remarks that they are short on girls to entertain themselves with tonight. As they speak, Lilith notices 3 girls in terrible condition, tied up and gagged, and something inside her snaps. Meanwhile, back with Weiss, 2 of the Boudin brothers walk ahead when they suddenly hear a strange sound, followed by a spray of blood. As they slowly turn around, the 3rd brother lets out a scream. It turns out that Weiss has already severed one of his hands. It is then revealed that Milk had previously told him that the most important thing in combat is to catch the opponent off guard. She had explained that a first strike delivered by surprise surpasses any other attack, adding that even a master of magic would die if struck before they could prepare. The same applies to masters of martial arts, as they would fall if their neck were broken before they could even brace themselves. Thus, the key is to move before the opponent does. Realizing what has happened, the brothers, enraged, quickly surround Weiss, with one swiftly moving behind him. However, Weiss easily deals with him using a back kick, knocking him off balance. Seizing the opportunity, another brother leaps forward with a cleaver to attack, but Weiss regains his balance just in time and swiftly slices off the man's arm. He then grips his sword in his mouth and, grabbing the man he had just disarmed, throws him into the brother whose arm he had previously severed. Immediately after, he blasts both of them with magic before rushing toward the 3rd, fully determined to break away from his former lazy self. In this way, he manages to defeat all 3 of them, though the battle proves far more difficult than he had imagined. Even so, he realizes that if he had entered the alley without acting first, they would have strengthened their defenses and prepared for combat, leaving him with no chance of victory. His decision to strike first had been the sole reason he won. Just then, Lilith and Milk arrive at the scene, and Milk comments that although she would have given him full marks, she is awarding him 70 points instead. She explains that if it had been her, she would have cut off an arm inside the Adventurers Guild, as that would have been the most proactive approach. Lilith, on the other hand, is impressed and gives him 200 points from her perspective. Irritated, Weiss asks Milk why she had suddenly disappeared, to which she casually apologizes and laughs it off. As he begins to accept it, he notices a red stain on Lilith's sleeve. Thinking it is blood, he asks her about it, but she quickly covers the stain with her hand and insists it is just his imagination. However, that is not the case. The stain is the result of her having massacred all the thugs in the inn. A few days later, in a garden gazebo, someone is reading the news about the incident. The report states that more than 20 members of a notorious band of thieves have been arrested. And although there were no fatalities, the criminals had been beaten so severely that they could not even speak. Additionally, the article, which features Weiss's image, reports that the infamous Boudin brothers were also arrested with the cooperation of Weiss Vincent. The girl reading the newspaper appears to know Weiss, as she speaks his name with familiarity. Meanwhile, Weiss himself is also reading the same article, though he has no knowledge of the band of thieves and wonders what it is referring to. A year and 3 months pass since his fight with the Boudin brothers, during which he continues his training and achieves overwhelming growth. His training regimen remains just as intense, pushing him to the point of exhausting both his mana and stamina until he collapses. However, he has now grown to the extent that such exhaustion no longer occurs. More importantly, he can sense the presence of enemies even through walls, and he can feel mana flowing abundantly through his body, a clear sign of how much stronger he has become. Later, as he is having dinner, Zevis asks if his magic training is going smoothly, to which Weiss replies that it is. However, he admits that he is struggling with Milk's harsh, almost Spartan training, which involves mastering all 4 elemental types of magic equally. As he says this, he casually materializes the 4 elemental attributes, leaving Zevis completely speechless. Weiss continues, complaining that Milk is like a demon and even worse than the Boudin brothers he had captured. While speaking, his gaze drifts toward a window, where he suddenly notices someone standing behind it, none other than Milk herself. Frozen in shock and terror, he says nothing, while Zevis calmly points out that the reason Milk is pushing him so hard is likely because his talent is far beyond ordinary. While Zevis explains that normally a person can only use 1 elemental attribute of magic, the door suddenly creaks open and Milk enters the room. As she begins beating Weiss senselessly, Zevis continues, adding that even someone like Milk, an S-rank adventurer, can only use 2. However, Weiss can use all 4, making him an exceptionally rare talent. Zevis reflects that such potential would have never blossomed if Weiss had remained lazy, and that it is surprising how diligently he has worked without giving up to reach this point. As he thinks this with his eyes closed, preparing to praise Weiss further, he opens them only to find that Weiss is no longer there, having already been dragged away by Milk. Meanwhile, outside the manor, Weiss apologizes repeatedly, begging Milk not to hit him. Cowering behind Lilith, he pleads for protection as Lilith steps in front of him and asks Milk to stop breaking his nose with a wooden sword. Milk then questions Weiss, asking if he has been practicing magic behind her back. As he apologizes, she tells him to show her what he has been hiding. Since she has already seen the 4 main elements, Weiss demonstrates 2 additional ones, light and dark. Lilith is surprised, and even Milk is taken aback, realizing that in addition to the standard 4 elements, he can also use rare attributes like light and dark. She then asks why he kept this a secret, to which Weiss explains that he wanted to reveal it only after completing it, as it is still unfinished. Confused, she repeats the word unfinished, and Weiss confirms, admitting that he has not yet fully mastered it. His goal is to combine light and dark magic to create an original spell, and now that both of them are watching, he decides this is the perfect moment to complete it. With that, he begins merging the 2 elements, revealing the result of a year and a half of effort, astonishing both Lilith and Milk. The following night, Weiss attends a banquet hosted by a noble, accompanied by Lilith. As he yawns, Lilith asks if he stayed up late the previous night, prompting him to apologize, realizing such behavior is inappropriate in a formal setting. She then asks whether it is due to what she said or lingering fatigue from the previous day, but he denies it and reassures her that he is fine. It is then revealed that after successfully completing his original magic, Weiss had created a spell by combining light magic, healing light, and dark magic, dark haze, resulting in a new ability called Dark Heal. This spell automatically heals all allies within a certain range while continuously inflicting curse damage on any enemies it identifies. Although he succeeded in creating such a powerful technique, its mana consumption is overwhelming, leaving him completely exhausted after using it. From this, Weiss realizes that he must train even harder to further increase his mana capacity. Noticing his troubled expression, Lilith suggests waking him up by bringing him some strong alcohol. Weiss tries to decline, but she moves too quickly for him to stop her. As she slips through the crowd without anyone noticing, he is left speechless, finding her movements as agile as those of an assassin. He recalls hearing in the game that the Vincent family supposedly had hidden guards, but he brushes the thought aside, believing it cannot be true. Still unsettled, he is suddenly called out to by a girl standing behind him. As he turns around, it is revealed to be the same girl who was reading the newspaper in the gazebo and had recognized him. Weiss seems to recognize her as well, as he is visibly shocked upon seeing her, and in confusion, calls out the name Cynthia Violetta. With her shimmering hair and striking red eyes, he is certain of her identity. It is then revealed that she is none other than the main heroine of the game. Cynthia greets him with a long time no see, but with dark, hollow eyes she asks what is wrong, remarking that he looks as though he has just crushed a goblin into muddy paste. At first he is taken aback by her harsh tone, but then he remembers he is Weiss, a character despised by nearly everyone in the game. Among them, Cynthia had hated him the most. Not only that, she had ultimately been responsible for leaving his body riddled with holes by the end of the story. As a member of the Vincent family, he had reluctantly attended this banquet, but now he regrets it, never expecting to encounter Cynthia before enrolling in the academy. He tries to calm himself, reasoning that since he has not yet enrolled, he has not done anything to earn her hatred. Yet, however, just as he thinks this, a memory from the original Weiss surfaces. In that memory, Cynthia is present, making him question what exactly had happened between them. Then his eyes widen as he recalls the truth of what the previous Weiss had done. Cynthia steps closer, her voice cold as she tells him she has not forgotten what happened back then. She recounts how he had used his noble status to forcefully bring her into a room and attempted to defile her with his filthy hands. Still stunned, Weiss can only listen as she moves even closer and in an even colder tone calls him a trash noble. As she questions how he can brazenly attend such a party, Weiss finds himself overwhelmed, realizing this is the worst possible situation. He cannot help but curse the actions of the former Weiss, as her hatred is so intense that it feels suffocating. With no other option left, he decides to sincerely apologize. Bowing his head, he addresses her respectfully as Lady Cynthia and admits that everything had been his fault, acknowledging that his actions had been unworthy of a noble and expressing genuine regret. He knows he may never be forgiven, but the Cynthia he remembers is not so cruel as to condemn someone who is truly remorseful. After a brief silence, her tone softens slightly as she remarks that she never expected him to lower his head in front of others. Hearing this, he cautiously lifts his gaze, sensing that, even if only a little, her anger has eased. He hopes this will at least reduce the chances of his eventual downfall. For now, he knows he should find the right moment to leave, but as someone who had admired her in the game, he cannot help but want to get a little closer to Cynthia. However, he is well aware that he and Cynthia are like light and darkness, two existences that should never cross paths. To him, it feels like a hero flying too close to the sun. If someone like him, a disgraced noble, approaches a well-bred young lady, it can only end badly. Thus, though it pains him, he believes he has no choice but to withdraw. Just as he reaches that conclusion, he suddenly feels someone grab his hand. To his shock, it is Cynthia. Meanwhile, Lilith, holding a glass of alcohol, searches for Weiss and soon finds him with Cynthia clinging to his arm. Then, out of nowhere, Cynthia asks him if he would like to have a dance with her, displaying a sudden and drastic shift in personality. Weiss is completely shocked and flustered, while Lilith is equally stunned, her dark, hollow eyes reflecting her disbelief, and both of them react in sync. The next day, at the gazebo within the Vincent estate, Weiss sits with someone who comments on how lovely the weather is, mentioning the soft chirping of birds. In a stiff voice, Weiss awkwardly agrees, remarking that the birds are indeed chirping, after which an uncomfortable silence falls between them. It is then revealed that the person sitting with him is none other than Cynthia, and Weiss is internally screaming, questioning why she is at his residence. The chain of events leading to this situation began the previous night, when Cynthia unexpectedly invited him to dance. Since refusing would have been rude, especially considering his past actions toward her, he accepted. As they danced, Cynthia remarked that Weiss seemed puzzled and revealed that she already knew he had changed. It turns out she had heard rumors among the nobles about his daily training and preparation for the academy, as well as his supposed memory issues. She then asked if he truly did not remember what had happened that day. Realizing she was referring to the previous Weiss's actions, he confirmed that he did not remember and, averting his gaze, admitted that he did not even know how to properly apologize for it. Just as he said that, Cynthia suddenly spun him around and pulled him into a dramatic dip, closing the distance between them. With a faint blush, she then asked if he had also forgotten that he once said he liked her. Hearing this, Weiss became too flustered to respond, and as applause filled the room, Cynthia realized the dance had ended. With that, she bid him farewell, while Weiss could only watch her leave with wide, captivated eyes as if she had completely stolen his heart. That encounter should have ended there, but present at the same banquet had been Weiss's father, Agito Vincent, who witnessed everything. The following day, Weiss received a letter from his father and was shocked upon reading it, as it informed him of a dinner gathering with Cynthia at the Vincent mansion. Still trying to understand what it meant, he realized she was scheduled to arrive that very day, but to his surprise, she was already waiting outside. Despite having a terrible feeling about the situation, he orders all the servants to prepare to welcome her, while Lilith notices that there is another letter inside the envelope. With everything that has happened since the banquet, the situation leads directly to the present moment. Weiss finds himself deeply frustrated with his father, wondering what that man could possibly be thinking. Yet if he is honest with himself, he cannot deny that he is genuinely happy at the thought of spending time with Cynthia, someone he has come to admire. Even so, he knows he cannot afford to grow too close to her, as she was originally meant to end up with the protagonist, Alan. Thus, if he were to get close to Cynthia, the events involving Alan would no longer occur, changing the future into something completely unpredictable. If that were to happen, he would no longer be able to rely on his knowledge of the original scenarios to anticipate what comes next. Although he is aware that even defeating Alan in a test could alter the future, he believes that taking away the main heroine would completely derail the entire plot. This leaves him in a lose-lose situation. Being disliked is bad, yet being liked is just as dangerous. Because of this, he decides to maintain a careful distance. Just as he is thinking this, Cynthia calls out to him. She reminds him that he once said he had fallen in love with her at first sight and asks if he has forgotten. Though shocked, he listens as she continues, explaining that at the time, it had been too sudden for her. Not only that, but the way he had acted had been somewhat arrogant, which had left her dissatisfied. She then adds that if he is now capable of showing such sincere remorse, blushing slightly as she speaks, she would not necessarily oppose his proposal. Hearing this, Weiss is completely stunned, wondering what she is even talking about. More than that, he is surprised to see such a soft side of her, which unsettles him, as growing closer to her would only make things worse. Thinking back, he recalls how, in the original game, the speed at which she fell for the protagonist had been unusually fast. That makes the current situation even more dangerous, as Cynthia is the type who, once she falls in love, becomes deeply devoted. Realizing this, he concludes that his best course of action is to somehow lower her affection for him. However, just as he reaches that conclusion, Cynthia giggles and comments that his shy side is rather cute. This troubles him even more, as he can tell her favorability is only increasing. While he is lost in thought, Lilith suddenly appears behind him with tea, startling him enough to make him let out an embarrassing yelp. He quickly thanks her, but then realizes how pathetic that must have sounded. At first, he assumes it might have worked in his favor by turning Cynthia off, but instead, it only seems to increase her interest further, making him conclude that she is completely hopeless and that he needs to act quickly. Soon after, Cynthia asks if he has heard about today's matter from his father. Confused, Weiss asks what she means by today. She explains that it concerns their engagement and that the dinner gathering is meant to serve as their formal introduction. She adds that although it was something their parents decided on their own, after speaking with him she finds herself agreeing with it. Hearing this, Weiss can only sigh. Meanwhile elsewhere, the sound of something being stabbed echoes repeatedly as Weiss's father, Egido Vincent, remarks on what a troublesome son he has. Surrounded by his bodyguards, he comments that although he and Weiss share similar good looks, Weiss is far too shy when it comes to matters like this. After seeing Weiss dance with the renowned Cynthia, Egido had immediately taken action and initiated talks of their engagement without hesitation. It is then revealed that he is casually playing in a sandbox like a child while his bodyguards stand nearby. Bursting into laughter, he wonders aloud if Weiss is happy by now. One of his bodyguards, however, questions whether he should really be doing this without his son's approval. Egido dismisses the concern, insisting that as Weiss's father, he can understand what his son wants just by looking at his face. He then tells the guard to stop complaining and help him dig the tunnel further. Moments later, Cynthia leaves the Vincent mansion with a bright smile, while Weiss, deeply troubled, wonders what the hell this engagement is supposed to mean. He had only learned about it during Cynthia's visit when Lilith showed him the second letter. He is aware that in noble families it is common for parents to choose their children's marriage partners, but this does not seem like a typical politically arranged marriage to him. Instead, it seems as though his father had made arrangements with the Violetta family simply to make his son happy. Since Egido had barely appeared in the game and rarely came home in this life, Weiss had never known what kind of father he was. Now, however, he is certain that Egido is the very definition of an excessively indulgent parent. Realizing this, he begins to understand one of the biggest reasons Weiss had turned into a villain. As he thinks about all of this, he suddenly hears sniffling from behind him. Turning around, he notices Lilith standing there with teary eyes. She suddenly breaks down crying and begs him to be happy with Cynthia. After saying that, she quickly dashes away at such incredible speed that Weiss is left stunned, but he quickly decides to focus on what is wrong with Lilith. Just then, Milk suddenly appears out of nowhere and declares that today's training quota is to chase Lilith. She asks him if he knows why Lilith is crying, but before he can answer, she explains that the man she has been supporting for a year and a half was suddenly taken away by a young lady who appeared out of nowhere. She adds that even though the engagement was not Weiss's decision, she will not allow him to ignore the fact that Lilith is saddened by it. Thus, she orders him to bring Lilith back to the mansion, warning him that if he fails, she will punish him with death. Understanding the situation, Weiss immediately dashes off to chase after Lilith while Milk yells at him to hurry. He realizes that it is only natural for Lilith to be shocked by this engagement, as she has always been by his side. More importantly, he owes Lilith a debt because, if she had not supported him, he would have remained his lazy former self. Just as he finally gets close enough to reach out and stop her, Lilith suddenly accelerates and vanishes from his grasp. She moves even faster than before and tells Weiss to leave her alone. He is genuinely shocked by her speed because even though he is chasing her with all his strength, he still cannot catch up to her. However, he refuses to give up and continues chasing her to the point that they run through a jungle and even cross a river. When he begs her to listen to him just once, she tells him that it is fine because it cannot be helped since she is only a maid. They eventually end up running in circles and pass in front of the Vincent mansion once again. Weiss then tells her that she is not just a maid but someone truly special to him. Still chasing after her, he explains that the engagement was decided by his father and has nothing to do with his own wishes. More importantly, he asks if she knows about the servant system at the Noble Academy. He explains that at the Noble Magic Academy, where he will soon enroll, only high-ranking nobles are allowed to bring one servant as a special exception. He reveals that he plans to take her with him because she is the person he trusts most, leaving Lilith shocked and finally willing to listen to him. As they run past the Vincent mansion once again, Lilith asks if that means he is trying to pursue a relationship with her. However, Weiss is far too exhausted to answer, while Lilith asks once again if he will continue chasing after her forever. Completely drained, Weiss realizes that he is on the verge of losing consciousness, so in order to end this, he quickly replies that he will. With that confirmation, Lilith finally stops and proudly declares herself Weiss's mistress. However, as Weiss's body completely gives out mid-slide, his momentum sends him flying off the rail and straight past the edge of a cliff. Suspended in the air as he is about to fall, Lilith calls out to him in panic, but he appears to be unconscious, so she immediately leaps off the cliff to save him. She manages to catch him, leaving both of them suspended tens of thousands of feet above the river below. Hugging him tightly, she tells Weiss to relax because she will do her best and promises never to tell anyone about their relationship. With that, they begin falling, and as Weiss barely regains consciousness, Lilith asks if what they share is a secret love affair. Moments later, the two of them crash into the river, and just like that, Weiss becomes engaged to Cynthia Violetta while also becoming involved in an affair with Lilith. Meanwhile, in a rural village, smoke rises from a massive boulder with a boy standing in front of it. It appears that the boy has sliced the boulder in half with a sword, and beside him stand a girl and another boy. The swordsman is none other than the original protagonist of this world, who has just finished training for the Noble Academy's entrance exam. A few days later, Milk is training Cynthia and asks whether she believes her current progress is enough to improve the quality of her magic. Cynthia replies that it is not and says she can refine it even further. Milk then moves on to Lilith's training and instructs her to lower her magic output slightly and distribute it more evenly, which Lilith accepts. Meanwhile, Weiss remains quiet on the outside while internally screaming as he wonders why Cynthia is at his house again, and finds the sight of his master and fiancée standing side by side incredibly bizarre. He is having an extremely difficult time processing this entire situation and finds it utterly ridiculous. Internally, he sarcastically thanks his father for making everything so unnecessarily complicated and promises that when Ajito returns from his diplomatic duties, he will have plenty of complaints waiting for him. Milk then calls an end to basic training and announces that they will move on to practical sparring. She asks Lilith and Cynthia if they have sparred before, and both of them answer yes, which surprises Weiss, especially regarding Lilith. Setting that aside, another complication is that both Lilith and Cynthia have joined his training sessions. They both asked Milk to train them in preparation for the entrance exam, which is only a few months away. However, Cynthia already possesses more than enough ability to pass with ease. As for Lilith, Weiss had originally planned for her to serve only as his attendant, so she did not need to take the exam at all. However, because she wanted to support him academically as well, he allowed her to take the test alongside him. Technically, neither of them truly needs additional training, yet Weiss cannot help but wonder if Cynthia, who is already guaranteed to pass, might become even more formidable than she was in the game if she continues working this hard. Just as he is thinking that, Milk hands him a wooden sword and informs him that he will be fighting Cynthia first. She warns him not to get distracted and hold back simply because Cynthia is his fiancée. Hearing this makes Cynthia happy, while Weiss feels slightly embarrassed, and Lilith cheers him on to do his best. With that, Weiss and Cynthia stand face to face with wooden swords in hand as Milk officially begins the match. Milk then asks Weiss if he understands what she meant even without her explicitly saying it. Confused, he asks what she means, but before he can get an answer, Cynthia suddenly leaps toward him and attacks. Although the sudden strike catches him off guard, he barely manages to block the blow. As he struggles to hold his ground, Cynthia smiles, and the clash of their wooden swords sends shockwaves erupting through the area. Milk then asks Weiss what she had taught him about the most important rule in a fight, and Cynthia immediately reminds him that it is to make the first move. Right after saying that, Cynthia suddenly disappears, shocking Weiss. However, he quickly realizes what is happening and activates a skill that engulfs his irises in dark flames. With this ability, he rapidly scans his surroundings and manages to locate her position. As Cynthia appears beside him and prepares to strike, he quickly attempts to retreat and dodge. He recalls that Cynthia specializes in ice magic and that her signature technique involves infusing her legs with ice, allowing her to move at incredible speeds as though she is skating. He barely avoids her attack and quickly raises his sword to strike her blind spot. The attack successfully lands, but he accidentally hits her far too hard, causing Cynthia to cry out in pain while Weiss immediately apologizes in panic. Milk ends the sparring match as both of them stare at the large bump forming on Cynthia's head. Weiss quickly explains that he had only intended to lightly tap her. Milk clarifies that because he swung his wooden sword while Cynthia was moving at such high speed, the strike effectively became a powerful counterattack. With teary eyes, Cynthia expresses her frustration, explaining that she has sparred many times before, but this is the first time someone has dodged her attack so easily. Just then, Lilith uses healing magic on Cynthia, causing both the pain and the bump to disappear. Cynthia thanks her, and Lilith calmly replies that it is nothing, leaving Weiss sighing in relief. Moving on, Milk asks Weiss how he managed to track Cynthia's high-speed movements, as she should have been far too fast to follow. However, when she sees his completely confused expression, she realizes she is not going to get an answer and instead decides to determine whether it was pure luck. She announces that Lilith will be his next opponent. Weiss is immediately confused and asks why he has to fight again, but Milk simply asks if he is tired and tells him to stop whining. With that, both of them take their positions, and Lilith politely says that she is looking forward to their match, which Weiss nervously returns. He believes there is no way he could seriously spar against Lilith, who is supposedly just a maid. However, he quickly recalls seeing her perform actions countless times that are anything but maid-like. As he realizes that lowering his guard could get him killed, Lilith suddenly vanishes into thin air right before his eyes. Unlike Cynthia, she does not completely disappear. Instead, she moves around him at such overwhelming speed that he sees countless afterimages of her, making it seem as though she has created clones of herself. A moment later, Lilith launches an attack that Weiss barely manages to block with his sword. She does not stop there and instantly moves behind him to attack again, which he barely blocks as well. Watching from the sidelines, Milk is impressed that Weiss can keep up with Lilith's movements, confirming that his ability to react to Cynthia's speed was not a fluke. Weiss is completely confused by what is happening because, in the game, Lilith had been nothing more than his attendant with barely any screen time. He never imagined that she would be this powerful. Even though she has only recently begun learning magic, her speed far surpasses Cynthia, and on top of that, she appears to possess extensive knowledge of swordsmanship. Realizing that he will lose if he does not take the fight seriously, Weiss decides to use his original magic and releases his sword. Gathering a mixture of light and dark elements, he slams his hand into the ground and casts Dark Heal, creating a massive magic circle across the ground like an area of effect spell. Startled, Lilith pauses for a moment as she recalls that this is Weiss's original magic. From what she remembers, it is a skill that heals allies within the magic circle while continuously dealing curse damage to enemies. At first, she plans to quickly escape the circle to avoid its effects. However, she soon notices that Weiss had temporarily let go of his wooden sword in order to cast magic with both hands, leaving himself seemingly defenseless. More importantly, she realizes that even if she escapes the circle now, as someone who specializes in close combat, she would simply be attacked from a distance by Weiss while he remains safely inside the circle. Concluding that this is the only opportunity she will have, she rushes at him to seize the opening. However, Weiss does not move and instead smirks. Just as Lilith gets close enough and lands a strike, it is revealed that Weiss has surrounded himself with a barrier. Not only does it block her attack, but it also repels her strike, leaving her shocked as Weiss declares that he will no longer hold back. The magic he uses is called Absolute Barrier, another of his original spells that combines the permanence of dark magic with the protective nature of light magic. In addition, the ability he used earlier to track movement is another original spell known as Dark Eye. With these abilities, even if his physical body cannot keep up with Lilith's speed, he can continue defending against her attacks by fully utilizing Dark Eye and Absolute Barrier for as long as his mana lasts. Seeing that this has become a near checkmate situation, Milk asks Lilith what she plans to do next. However, just as she says this, she notices something strange and immediately yells at Weiss to cancel his magic. Confused, Weiss looks back at Lilith and realizes that she is collapsing. Milk rushes toward her as Lilith falls to the ground, and Weiss calls out her name in panic. Later, Lilith is brought beneath a tree to rest, where she admits that this was her complete defeat. Ignoring her statement, Weiss apologizes and asks if she is alright, but Milk informs him that she has already given Lilith an advanced potion and that she will be fine. Setting that aside, Milk asks Weiss what kind of magic he used. Although she knew that Dark Heal drained stamina, she never expected Lilith of all people to collapse after only a few seconds. She asks if the spell has any additional effects, and Weiss confirms that it does. He reveals that anyone who enters the magic circle is afflicted with physical weakness, stamina reduction, vitality reduction, mana drain, reduced magic defense, reduced physical defense, decreased attack speed, and reduced movement speed. He explains that all of these debuffs are inflicted on the target simultaneously. He believes Lilith collapsed so quickly because her relatively low mana reserves were drained almost instantly. More importantly, Weiss reveals that he receives the exact opposite effect. Instead of suffering debuffs, he absorbs the stolen attributes and adds them to his own strength. He further explains that the more enemies trapped within the magic circle, the stronger he becomes. And if he recognizes someone as an ally, he can grant them the same enhancements as well. As Weiss finishes explaining with his eyes closed, he opens them and notices all three girls staring at him blankly. Confused by their reaction, he wonders if this is one of those moments where he gets to say the ultimate line every reincarnated protagonist dreams of saying. He has always wanted to say it himself and wonders if now is the right time. With that thought in mind, he fixes his hair and begins to ask if he has done something amazing again, only to be abruptly interrupted by Milk, who demands a duel with him. She radiates a menacing aura, clearly excited by his growth, and declares that she needs to take responsibility for this. She tells him to use his newfound power to calm her down. Weiss does exactly that, but things go very differently than expected. After suffering an incredibly brutal defeat, Lilith and Cynthia rush to his side. As Weiss continues enduring Milk's brutal Spartan training every day alongside Lilith and Cynthia, the misunderstanding between the three of them remains unresolved. Before he realizes it, days turn into months, and the day of the Noble Magic Academy entrance exam finally arrives. Weiss, Lilith, and Cynthia arrive at the Noble Magic Academy, which boasts the largest campus in the world. It is considered the most prestigious educational institution sought after by nobles everywhere, and today, its entrance exam is being held. On the way to the school building, one student angrily asks another why he is staring at him. The other student quickly apologizes and explains that he did not mean to stare and simply thought the boy looked very large. Misinterpreting this as an insult, the angry student throws a punch. However, before the punch can land, Weiss effortlessly stops it by grabbing the attacker's fist while glaring at him. His grip is so strong that the student cries out in pain and demands to know who Weiss is. The students passing by instantly recognize Weiss as the infamous abusive noble. They also notice the girl beside him and speculate that she must be Cynthia from the Violetta family, as rumors about their engagement have already spread. However, they do not recognize Lilith and are shocked to see Weiss arriving with two attractive girls. Overhearing these conversations, the angry student trembles in fear after realizing that he had just confronted the infamous noble Vincent Weiss. He immediately begs for forgiveness, but Weiss simply tells him to leave. The student runs away in terror, and Weiss realizes from this interaction that even after all this time, his terrible reputation is still very much intact. Because of this, he decides to act as friendly as possible and gradually change how others perceive him. Setting that aside, it has been 2 years since he began training, and at long last, the day he has prepared for has finally arrived. Today, at this academy, he must defeat a certain person. As he thinks about this, the student he saved approaches him and thanks him for stepping in. When Weiss turns around, it is revealed that the student is none other than Alan, the original protagonist of this world, the very person he must defeat. Alan reaches out his hand for a handshake and says that they should both do their best today, hoping they both pass the exam. Just as Weiss reaches out to shake his hand, an alarm suddenly rings. Lilith explains that it is a warning bell, while Cynthia adds that it means the exam is about to begin. The girl standing beside Alan suggests that they should hurry, and he agrees before both of them begin heading toward the examination hall. Before leaving, the girl, Alan's childhood friend, Cheryl Elias, turns around and with a slight glare thanks Weiss for helping them. With that, the two of them leave, while Weiss remains slightly confused, wondering what that strange feeling was. He realizes that he could not accept Alan's handshake because, for some reason, he had hesitated to reach out and take Alan's hand. Not only that, but simply speaking to Alan fills Weiss with an unbearable sense of unease. He wonders why, since it is not as though he particularly dislikes Alan. He simply wants to defeat him in the exam and afterward remain on friendly terms while keeping a reasonable distance. After the written exam ends, the teacher announces that the next test will be practical combat. For this portion, everyone is required to change into uniforms passed down from former students, which are designed to reduce damage from both magic and physical attacks. Although Weiss had a clear plan, his heart feels strangely restless, and he cannot ignore the unsettling throbbing sensation within him. Doing his best to suppress it, he enters the training grounds alongside Lilith and Cynthia. Once there, he suddenly feels as though something is taking over him, and he is overwhelmed by the urge to crush not only Alan but everyone present in the arena. As he struggles to suppress these feelings, the teacher explains that victory will be awarded to whoever either knocks their opponent out of the ring or forces them to surrender. However, if things become dangerous, the teacher will intervene. He then asks if anyone has any questions, prompting one student to raise his hand. The student complains that his uniform is too small, and the teacher responds in annoyance that it is far too late to complain about that now. Another student then complains that his uniform is also too small, the belt has snapped and it smells strange. Growing even more irritated, the teacher tells them not to bring it up now and asks if they are really 15 years old because they are far too large. He explains that if they pass, they will receive new uniforms that properly fit their size, so they simply need to endure it for now. With that, the teacher suggests beginning the matches, while Alan cheers on the complaining student whose name is Duke. Lilith finds it impressive that the academy managed to prepare uniforms for every applicant, making her feel as though they are already enrolled. Cynthia then explains that this is only possible because many former students abandon their uniforms and disappear. She believes this only proves how hellish life at the academy truly is, something Weiss internally agrees with. In the game, the Noble Magic Academy is known as the most prestigious and brutal educational institution in the kingdom, where anyone unable to keep up is expelled immediately. Not only that, but the lessons are so intense that some students do not even survive. Because of this, many students discard their uniforms as they leave, never wanting to see them again. That being said, getting accepted is not actually that difficult. Even the previous lazy version of Weiss managed to pass in the game. A few moments later, the examiner calls out contestant number 909 Weiss and announces that he will be facing contestant number 907 Alan. While Alan is surprised that he will be fighting Weiss, Weiss already knows this was going to happen because it followed the events of the game. Just then, a student points out that it is pouring rain outside. Since it cannot be helped, the teacher tells everyone except those currently fighting to move to the spectator seats. This leaves only Weiss, Alan, and the examiner in the arena, while the other students watch from the spectator area, where the rain mysteriously does not fall on them. While Cheryl cheers for Alan, he expresses his surprise that he will be facing Weiss in the mock battle. Weiss, meanwhile, is being cheered on by Lilith but remains completely silent as the examiner officially begins the match. The moment the examiner gives the signal to start, Weiss instantly rushes forward and strikes Alan in the face, sending him crashing to the ground. He then throws his sword into the air and uses both hands to cast Dark Heal. As the magic circle activates immediately, Alan is overwhelmed with immense pain and screams in agony, shocking everyone present. Hearing the horrifying scream, even the examiner becomes terrified, while Weiss realizes that the situation is spiraling out of control. Although he manages to prevent the spell's negative effects from targeting the examiner, he cannot suppress the overwhelming urge burning inside him to completely crush Alan. He is deeply confused and wonders why he has been feeling this way since earlier. As his body moves almost uncontrollably and he grabs Alan by the collar, the teacher suddenly lets out a strange voice, claiming that he feels incredibly good. Holding a badly beaten Alan by his collar, Weiss begins to wonder if all of this is happening because of the previous Weiss. Moments later, both Zevis and Milk are summoned to the headmaster's office and are asked what exactly they did to Weiss. To everyone's surprise, Weiss has shattered nearly every academy record in a single day. Because of this, the headmaster calls in the two people who helped raise him and asks what they think about a boy possessing such dangerous abilities. In response, both Zevis and Milk remain silent while a teacher standing beside the headmaster asks to speak. This teacher, Darius, acknowledges that Weiss achieved the highest score in academy history, but points out that he did not technically break every record. He reminds the headmaster about a student from the previous year, causing the headmaster to realize that Weiss actually tied for first place with that girl. Milk responds by saying that she did nothing particularly special for Weiss and only provided him with basic training. Zevis adds that he did the same and merely supported Weiss by preparing meals for him. He explains that he fed Weiss plenty of protein, leaving Darius confused as Zevis casually lists things like soy products, dairy, chicken tenders, and other foods. Frustrated, Darius angrily shouts at them to stop messing around because Weiss not only mastered the 4 major elements, but also created original light and dark magic. He argues that there is no way Weiss could have accomplished that through the methods they are describing. While casually drinking, Milk responds that she does not know how to convince him. Darius immediately demands to know why she is drinking alcohol in front of the headmaster of all people. More importantly, he asks who even gave her alcohol, only for Zevis to casually reply that she likely brought it herself. The headmaster intervenes and tells Darius to calm down, explaining that Milk has always behaved like this. However, Darius continues arguing that what happened to Alan was cruel and that the boy nearly died. He places all the blame on Weiss and explains that Alan is someone with exceptional talent whom he personally trained. Before he can continue, Milk cuts him off and asks whether he plans to repeat that same nonsense on an actual battlefield. With a smug and mocking expression, she tells him that jealousy is unsightly and asks whether he is lashing out simply because his student lost a serious match. Darius argues that if Milk had properly guided Weiss in the first place, none of this would have happened. However, he is interrupted once again by Zevis, who tells both of them to stop arguing. Zevis understands the headmaster's concerns regarding Weiss's enrollment and assures him that Weiss would never use his power against the weak, because he has changed. Rather than allowing himself to be consumed by his own abilities, Weiss continues pushing himself through genuine effort to become a man who is both strong and courageous. The following day, Weiss, Lilith, and Cynthia receive letters containing their exam results, confirming that all 3 of them have passed, with Lilith being especially happy by the news. With that, the first class for the new students begins and the teacher congratulates everyone on their enrollment. She introduces herself as Chloe, the instructor in charge of their class, and says she looks forward to teaching them. After her introduction, she officially welcomes all the students to the Noble Magic Academy. As Weiss glances around the classroom from the corner of his eye, he finally spots the person he has been looking for sitting only a few seats away. That person is none other than Alan, who managed to pass the exam despite losing their sparring match. Although Weiss successfully defeated Alan, he is fully aware that he had been consumed by the original Weiss's emotions and nearly beat Alan to death. Even more frustratingly, no matter how many times Weiss knocked him down, Alan kept getting back up, and each time he became even stronger. In the end, Weiss won by a landslide, but it took far longer than he had expected. Weiss finds the entire situation incredibly irritating, as if he had witnessed firsthand what it truly means to be a protagonist. Just as he is thinking about this, Chloe snaps her fingers, and a magic circle suddenly appears on the back of every student's hand, startling them. Inside each magic circle, the number 1000 appears. As the students grow confused, Chloe explains that these points are a measure that will follow them until graduation. She then informs everyone that all students have been granted 1000 points, except for Weiss, who has been awarded 2000 based on his test results. This shocks the entire class as chatter spreads throughout the room. One student demands to know what this means, arguing that if these points are essentially their grades, then giving Weiss double points from the start is unfair to everyone else. The students then demand a proper explanation of what the points are and how they can earn more. Hearing all of their complaints, Chloe decides that experience will teach them better than words. She instructs everyone to grab a wooden sword and head to the training grounds, causing cold sweat to run down the faces of many students. Later, when all the students arrive at the training grounds carrying wooden swords, Chloe announces that they will now begin a combat test. She reminds them that while she congratulated them on enrolling earlier, she never promised that she would see them graduate. She then reveals that any student whose points drop to 0 will be expelled immediately. For today's lesson, she has decided to let them fight until someone's points are completely depleted. Meanwhile, Milk happens to come across a group of bandits, and things do not end well for them. Everyone else lies beaten unconscious, leaving only 2 unlucky survivors, one forced to fan her while the other holds bottles of alcohol as she drinks. Setting that aside, Milk realizes that ever since Weiss left for the academy, every day has felt strangely empty. Because of this, she decides to pass the time by obtaining a teaching license at the Noble Magic Academy. Earlier, before class began, Weiss had been approached by a fellow student named Louis, who expressed how amazing he found Weiss's mock battle. However, Lilith and Cynthia both radiate an intimidating aura that makes it clear they do not want anyone approaching him, preventing Louis from continuing the conversation. Setting that aside, Louis is originally portrayed as a bright, refreshing, and handsome character who, in the story, achieves excellent grades and graduates at the top of his class. He is supposed to be a student with top-tier potential, yet that same Louis now has 0 points remaining. As a result, the teacher announces that Louis Millicent has been expelled from the academy. The reason he lost all of his points is simple. He was completely crushed by Alan. Later in the cafeteria, Weiss gets food for himself while feeling increasingly irritated as he wonders what he should do next. He had been trying his best not to disrupt the original storyline of the game, and had avoided taking unnecessary actions aside from defeating Alan, hoping to preserve the original plot as much as possible. However, the main heroine has now become his fiancée, and Louis, who was supposed to remain at the academy until graduation, has been expelled on the very first day. Everything is spiraling into completely unforeseen chaos. Even more troubling are the dark emotions of the original Weiss that continue to rise within him. Ever since he met Alan, his inner Weiss has constantly urged him to become aggressive, not only toward Alan but toward everyone around him. His original plan had been to act kindly and gradually earn everyone's trust, but now he cannot stop feeling the urge to crush them all. He realizes that if he gives in to these emotions and begins hurting those around him, he will end up hated just like the original Weiss. Because of this, he discusses the situation with Cynthia and admits that he feels like crushing everyone around him. To his surprise, Cynthia calmly says that she thinks that is perfectly fine if that is what he truly wants. As she thanks the chef for the meal, Weiss looks at her in confusion and asks if she really has no reaction despite hearing him say something so extreme. In response, Cynthia reminds him that this is the Noble Magic Academy. She explains that she had originally been worried about him entering the academy because he had always been too kind. In a world where it is either crush or be crushed, she believes no one can afford to show mercy to their opponents. However, after seeing how he fought during the exam, she says she has begun seeing him in a new light. In the middle of their conversation, the chef calls out to Cynthia and says there is still plenty of pot au feu left if she wants another bowl, but she politely declines. Setting that aside, Lilith tells Weiss that she feels the same way as Cynthia. She believes the world of competition is harsh, and if they choose to stand in it, they must be just as ruthless. However, she also believes that doing what he truly wants is what matters most, and she promises to support him no matter what. Weiss is caught off guard by her words. The chef then asks Lilith if she wants more pot au feu as well, but she also declines. Setting that aside once again, Cynthia lightly bumps Weiss's chest and tells him that as her fiancé, he should at least have the determination to crush everyone else. Feeling reassured, Weiss thanks both of them. As the chef once again enthusiastically repeats the name of the dish, Weiss admits that talking with both of them has truly helped him put things into perspective. He confesses that he does not know if he can come to terms with everything immediately, but he is still glad that he spoke with them. Lilith then suggests flipping a coin if he truly cannot make a decision, and Weiss agrees, deciding to leave things to fate, especially since half of the original story has already been destroyed, and he no longer knows what will happen from this point onward. By flipping the coin, Weiss hopes to stop overthinking everything and simply let fate decide for him. The moment he tosses the coin into the air, the chef suddenly grabs him and begs him to eat all the food, insisting that he put a great deal of effort into making it. Because of the sudden interruption, the coin flies sideways and begins bouncing across the floor like a ball before slowly coming to a stop. On one side of the coin is the image of the kingdom's castle, while the other side bears the symbol of a dragon representing the strongest. Weiss decides that if the coin lands on heads, he will resist his darker impulses, avoid causing further chaos, and make an effort to get along with Alan. However, just as he begins wondering what he will do if it lands on tails, the coin stops at someone's feet and that person bends down to pick it up. The person turns out to be Alan, who reaches out his hand and returns the coin while telling Weiss that he dropped it. As Weiss blankly stares at Alan's hand, Alan apologizes for not greeting him properly earlier and points out that he still managed to enroll despite being beaten nearly to death. Even so, Alan says that he is glad he was able to enroll because he wanted to see Weiss again. He quickly corrects himself and admits that what he truly wanted was to fight Weiss again. The moment Alan places the coin into Weiss's hand, Weiss smirks. The coin has landed on tails, the side that symbolizes the strongest. Taking that as his answer, Weiss decides that he will live as the strongest and tells Alan that the feeling is mutual. As the two of them stare intensely at one another with fierce competitive spirit, the chef returns to the kitchen in disappointment. Moments later, Duke walks in holding a bowl and asks if there is any more potofu left. A few moments later, just as Weiss has decided to live his life as the strongest, he laughs hysterically as he easily and brutally defeats one of the students in a combat test. As the students watch in horror, the teacher tells him to stop, announcing that his opponent, Chris Schlegel, has reached 0 points and is therefore expelled. However, Weiss does not stop there. When the students are moved to the forest near the academy for a group flag battle, Weiss begins eliminating other students with ease, starting with Gustav Gregorio and resulting in his expulsion. After that, he moves to the nearest group and effortlessly defeats the entire team of students. His brutality shocks even the teacher, as he buries one student neck deep in the ground, causing her to briefly mistake him for a severed head. Lilith and Cynthia, who are on his team, find his feat of defeating 6 rivals in a single day extremely impressive. Weiss then instructs both of them to flank the groups in front of them from either side and draw their attention, which they agree to do. The group ahead turns out to be Alan's, whom Weiss internally thanks because Alan is the reason he no longer hesitates. With that, Cynthia approaches Cheryl while Lilith takes care of Duke. Meanwhile, Weiss rushes straight toward Alan, planning to crush him head-on and tear this entire scenario to pieces. Moments later, the teacher announces through a bird that the match is over, as Weiss has defeated Alan, securing victory for his team. Later that night at the school's dormitory, one student remains awake while staring at her score circle. That student is a girl named Carta, the friend of the girl whom Weiss defeated earlier. Her friend had told her to keep going even if she was no longer around. However, Carta is already at her limit as she only has 22 points left. This causes her to tear up as she quietly asks anyone to please help her. The next day, around a month has passed since enrollment, and 10 students have already dropped out. Of those 10, 7 were sent packing by Weiss. In the classroom, as the students examine the notice board, they chatter among themselves in shock after discovering that Weiss has ranked first not only in magic and stealth training, but also in tracking and defense. Just then, a frustrated Duke approaches Weiss and asks if this is his second life or something. He asks Weiss what kind of training regimen he follows to become so strong, as even during yesterday's flag battle, he easily slipped past the magic threads Cheryl had set as if they were nothing. Not only that, but he also flattened Alan in an instant and snatched the flag before anyone could even blink. Thanks to that test, his score rises to 5,700 points, enough to place him firmly in first place across the entire year by a landslide. Frustrated, Duke once again asks how many virtues Weiss accumulated in his previous life to achieve such results, prompting Cheryl to tell him to shut up. Alan then apologizes to Cheryl and Duke for losing to Weiss again, to which Cheryl replies by telling him not to worry about it. She says that they will surely win next time and intensely glares at Weiss, making him a bit nervous. The previous Weiss used to vent his negative emotions in extremely cruel ways, which resulted in him being hated and ultimately brought to ruin. However, the current Weiss lets those emotions out fairly through matches. Thus, he has not done anything that should make him feel guilty, so there should be no reason for anyone to hate him. Despite all that, Cheryl still hates him because of his first match with Alan, so he internally asks her not to stare at him like that. Just as he is thinking this, he notices the teacher talking to a student. That student is Carta, whom the teacher is reminding that if she fails to score any points in the next practical test, she knows what will happen. With a completely defeated and hopeless expression, Carta replies that she understands and that she is fine. The teacher then walks away, saying that she did not ask whether she was fine or not. As the teacher leaves, Weiss stares at Carta with a troubled expression. In the original story, Carta was expelled after the next exam, and she used that frustration as fuel to motivate her best friend to get serious and aim for graduation. That was how the side story went. However, even though it had been a fair match, Weiss ended up getting her best friend expelled. That means that after the next test, she will quietly leave this place without leaving any particular mark behind, which does not sit right with him. Just then, two other female students call out to Carta and ask what she plans to do for the next exam. In a mocking tone, they remind her that the next exam is a tag battle and ask if she even has a partner, since her best friend, whom they refer to as annoying, has already been expelled. As they laugh and make fun of how easily her best friend lost to Weiss and was expelled, Weiss suddenly appears beside them, shocking the two girls as he calls out to Carta. Ignoring the two idiots, he asks Carta if she would team up with him for the next exam. Later, having no other choice, she agrees, so Weiss brings her to the forest near the academy. There, Carta asks him why he would want to pair up with someone like her when she is on the verge of expulsion while he is the top-ranked student. In her eyes, they do not match at all. Just as she is about to point out that he already has Cynthia, she suddenly feels an immense bloodlust coming from behind her, where someone is standing beside a tree. That person is none other than Cynthia, the very person she was about to mention. As she is terrified, Weiss asks her what is wrong. He then asks if she is perhaps concerned about his fiancée and assures her that there is nothing to worry about. He explains that Cynthia wants him to be the best in the academy, so she will understand that partnering with another girl is simply a means to achieve victory. As Carta nervously tries to point out the bloodlust, she suddenly notices that Cynthia is no longer there, leaving her confused while Weiss calls out to her. He explains that he is not trying to help her or anything, as he does not have the time or energy to waste feeling sorry for every student who gets expelled. However, Carta is not hearing any of this and is instead confused, wondering if what she just saw was merely her imagination. Meanwhile, Weiss continues, adding that it would be a real waste if she were to get expelled because her flying magic is truly impressive. He explains that even skilled mages find flying magic difficult to handle, so he thinks it would be a shame for someone like her, who can control it so well, to go unnoticed. However, Carta is still not paying attention to what he is saying. Instead, she keeps analyzing the area where she saw Cynthia, refusing to believe that she imagined it. Weiss, on the other hand, continues speaking, adding that aside from all that, he figured teaming up with her would be the most efficient option because of her skill. Just as he says that, Carta once again sees Cynthia standing beside the tree. This time, Cynthia lets out a creepy giggle and remarks that Carta's sensing ability is impressive. Cynthia wonders aloud whether her perception is even sharper than Weiss's dark eye, allowing her to pick up faint traces of magic that even Weiss cannot detect. Cynthia adds that despite that, Carta still failed to notice Lilith, who has mastered assassination techniques. The moment she says this, Carta becomes terrified as she suddenly notices Lilith standing right beside her. Lilith then explains that the upcoming tag battle is apparently a joint exam involving all 3 school years. She adds that Weiss seems to have discovered some kind of winning strategy by partnering with Carta, who possesses a special ability, rather than with her or Cynthia, both of whom can fight effectively on their own even against second and third year students. Just then, both girls cling to Carta, with Cynthia saying that she will be partnering with Lilith. Lilith continues by telling Carta that she is free to take the exam with Weiss. With that, both of them move even closer to Carta and creepily whisper her name, terrifying her to the point that tears begin forming in her eyes. Meanwhile, Weiss continues rambling through his explanation of why he chose her as his partner. He eventually concludes by saying that there is not much time left before the exam, so they will begin their special training immediately. After saying that, he turns around and sees a terrified Carta standing exactly where she was before, tightly gripping her wand. After a brief pause, with tears rolling down her cheeks and fear written all over her face, she accepts his proposal. And just like that, in preparation for the upcoming exam, Weiss begins his special training with Carta. However, it later proves to be far more difficult than he had anticipated. When he returns to the academy with Carta, he is in a dirty and disheveled state. Although injured, he admits that flight magic is quite tricky, but he believes that he is finally starting to get the hang of it. However, Carta disagrees, saying that he cannot even stay in the air for 2 seconds. She then reminds him that, according to their plan for the exam, she is supposed to be flying while carrying him with her. Because of that, she believes there is no real need for him to learn flight magic himself, to which he agrees. However, he adds that he sees this as a rare opportunity to learn it, so he thinks he should take advantage of the chance. Carta is surprised to hear this, while Weiss continues by saying that there is no harm in learning it, as any type of magic can become a powerful weapon depending on how it is used. Since he now has a flying magic teacher named Carta, he thought that perhaps she could teach him a little. He then apologizes for dragging her into this even though it has nothing to do with the exam. While she is still surprised by his honesty, Weiss continues by assuring her that in return he absolutely will not let her get expelled. With that, he asks if she would continue helping him practice flight magic from time to time even after the next exam. After a brief pause, Carta suddenly bursts into laughter, realizing that she cannot rely on rumors as she never expected Weiss to be such a hard worker. Thus she accepts his request. She adds that if he is willing to work with someone like her, then she would be happy to help him. She had always heard from everyone that Weiss was a lazy and disgraceful noble, but today she learned that he is nothing like that. Instead, she wants to be more like him, someone who is always eager to learn, eager to explore new things, and willing to work hard.